So, do it? Yeah, it works. Perfect. Okay. Today I'm going to be talking about FastAPI and Django, and I wasn't that familiar with FastAPI until I think a little bit over a year ago. So, and I'm okay. So I'll start first with a little bit about me. I'm Ivor Bosloper, and I studied computer science. I founded a company called Copper. It's now Dacom, and actually I sold the company 1.5 years ago. So we're now part of Cropix. We're making software for farmers. All over the world, and a little bit about my hobbies. I like GIS, so programming stuff with geospatial stuff. I'm not going to talk about geospatial today because I saw it made my examples a little bit more complex than required. But I use FastAPI and Django a lot with GIS. And I like Python, and I replaced the JavaScript icon of my last presentation with TypeScript because I like TypeScript better than JavaScript these days, but probably many people. So yeah. So what I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is FastAPI, and I'm not going to be having a really extensive talk about FastAPI because you can say a lot of things about it. But I'm going to show one thing about it, like how can you combine it with Django, and it's actually something we do in production these days. We combine FastAPI with Django, and I just wanted to show you how that works. So I'm going to have some examples, and also why would you do it, and what are the alternatives. So why would you even want to do it? So this is the outline of my talk. So let's get started. What is FastAPI? And I noticed that the author of FastAPI will be giving a talk as well a little bit later on. Actually, he's on the front row, so I have an honored guest. If I make mistakes, I probably will. he will be able to correct me. So I'm a little bit. No, I'm not nervous. So, anyways, so what is FastAPI? It's a web framework for building REST APIs. So it's in Python. You can build REST APIs with FastAPI, and when I read about FastAPI, someone said, "Oh, it's just Pydantic with Starlet," and then they made it work. But I think it's a little bit more because it has good documentation, and I think it's really usable. And I think I mentioned these ingredients. I cannot say a lot about Starlet. Like how I understand Starlet is it's like Flask, but then based on ASGI, and it's async by default. So it's a framework toolkit for building web stuff. But Pydantic is something you will encounter when you write a FastAPI application. So this is something that's relevant, and it's a data validation library. When you start reading a little bit more about it, it's not as much as validation. It also does mapping. Mapping things from JSON to Python classes automatically, and it's very lenient, so it helps you to get data from users or from JSON into Python in the right types very simply. So it's something FastAPI heavily uses, and it's I think it makes it really great because it's a great way to express stuff. So what is it exactly? What does it look like? And I tried to come up with a good example, but I copied something of the Pydantic website itself. So here, this is an example where they show how to, if you have JSON-based data, how to get it into a Pydantic object. So I can talk you through the example for a little bit, like what you do in the second line actually. So the user class, this is where you define your pointed works, yeah, sure. So this is where you define your Pydantic type based on a base model, and this is if you have some external data, some JSON data. This is how you can create a Pydantic object instance of this type, and by doing like this, Pydantic will make sure that it looks at your attributes and the values, and it maps it to the proper Python types. So it helps you. The good thing, what I like about this is after the Pydantic object is instantiated, the types are correct. So sometimes I notice with Django, when I create an object and I put in a string and I save to the database, it will put it in the database. Somewhere it will get the correct type, but your object doesn't have the right type. So if you then serialize it back to JSON, sometimes you provide the wrong type to the front end, and it's awkward. But Pydantic actually helps you to to always get the right types. And it's very lenient because it understands how to map this string to datetime. And it has all kinds of rules to making sure that it knows how to handle your input data and to create the right Python types out of it. So this is a bit about pedantic because it's something you need to understand some of the examples. So I tried to do a live coding session, and especially when I have a mic in my hand, I noticed I wouldn't be able to make that in 20 minutes. So what I did, I prepared some steps with Git for code examples. So what I did, I set up a virtual env and installed Django with FastAPI. I also installed FastAPI utils, not because I use it heavily, but there's one tiny thing in FastAPI utils which I really like. It was a snippet I found on other places, but they put it in this library. So what I did, basically, I did a start project, so and start app, and it should create a super user. So let's see if I can show you what it looks like. I think I have to escape it. Yeah, cool. Okay. Is this readable? Cool. Okay, yeah, maybe it's even better. Sure, cool. So, I'm on step one, yeah, sure. So what does it look like? I created a Django application, and I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with Django. I like it, and I will tell you a little bit later why I like Django. But what it basically does is it creates a directory with stuff to get started. And I created an app called PyApp. And it basically gives you an admin, models, tests, and views, and it's the basic structure of a Django application. So let's see if I can show you what it looks like. Maybe so throw away the database, so I can give you a proper example. Managed by server. Right. Cool. It won't work. So that's good to know. And this is okay. I'm switching. Okay. I'm switching between a browser to show you what happens and my coding environment. So I can go to localhost. Django works, right? But it's in debug mode. And if we now go to admin, it probably won't work because I have to log in and there's not even a database. So let's get started with a database because otherwise I don't have anything. This also works. This is better. This is better. Yeah. Let's see if we can make this work like this. So, migrate. I will create a database. And if I do run server again, before that I will create a super user. And I will create the super user so I can log in. This is basic Django stuff. With a very simple password. And the funny thing is, I think Chrome will complain about that. I like this. I can't have my first name as a password. So anyway, and what I did, I created two models, and I can show you what they look like in the code. What I did is I created a farm model with an owner and a field, and it's attached to it. So I can, if you show it schematically, you have a user. User has one or more farms, and a farm has one or more fields. This is an example because of the background of the stuff I'm programming with. But you could do it with I don't know, books or anything else as well. So, but this is basically what Django gives you. So let me instantiate some stuff. I will create a new farm. Assign it to myself. Ivor. Farm, save, and I create a field, so like this. That's it. Say field 1, and it has an area of something. So now I have 2 objects, or 3 actually, in my database: a user, a farm, and a field. So it will allow me to show me some more coding. So this is what you get with Django automatically. So I like that because it's very expressive. You just write down your models, and the database, if you use migration properly, they will work automatically. And the admin is very simple as well. And this is what you can get started with. So for my next step, I will show you step 2. I'm changing a few things. So what I'm changing is this. So what I do in the second step, I add FastAPI, because Django is like it is, and adding FastAPI, for adding FastAPI, I modify a few things. Most specifically in ASGI.py, it's something you can start running. Also in development, I make sure that I add FastAPI there. So the routing is done for some of the URLs goes to FastAPI. And I add two things. One is called endpoints.py. It's like urls.py in Django. It's your routing, but I separate the URLs from FastAPI from the URLs from Django, so at least I know what I'm doing. And the same goes with schemas. Actually, schemas is something that you don't necessarily have in Django by itself. It's something like DTOs in Java. It's some another object format where you specify how to serialize what your serialization domain model looks like, right? So I put it in schemas.py. And instead of running managed by run server, I use it with Ivor. So I use Ivor with reloading. So and this is what I changed in with moving to a second step of in Git. So I put it on GitHub somewhere, and you can show it a little bit later. But I will walk you through it. So the ASGI.py, what I added here is the basic ASGI.py is very simple. You only set the settings and you do the get application, and this is what you run. So if you have only Django, you can run only Django by doing it like this. Oh, sorry. And this will give you, this will allow you to just use Django by itself. But, what you can do if you want to use FastAPI, I import the basic object of FastAPI, so you can make a FastAPI router. I have to do some special stuff to make sure that FastAPI publishes some of this information on the /API endpoint, because I'm going to use the /API route for FastAPI, and I'm going to use the rest of the routes for Django only. And if you do it like this and you run it properly, like this, I have a running application that that still my Django stuff still works, right? So it's still there, but I have a new API, new route. It's called API, for instance, OpenAPI.json. Here the OpenAPI specification will be published, or you can look at a little bit more simply in the Swagger type format, where you can test your API. And these are the API endpoints I added in my FastAPI application. Something I didn't show, but if you look at it, this FastAPI application I showed here, I included a router, and in this router, I added some endpoints. So this is how you can add endpoints in FastAPI. And the interesting thing is maybe two things. One is I use simple Django objects like you get back from the ORM. They're serialized somehow to the proper way by this farm DTO object. So I create data transfer objects, and I put them in schemas, like I explained. So here, by extending from API model, and it's not the Pydantic. This is actually Pydantic, but it's Pydantic on steroids, because this API model, it will have a special meta class saying that ORM mode is enabled, and something else I really like about it, they use snake to camel case automatically. So I can probably show it. So this is it's a base model, so it's basically Pydantic, but by adding this meta config class, it will change the behavior of Pydantic a little bit. And especially this alias generator I like, because now if you like correct linting or typing, and it's a discussion. I don't want to go deep into it, but I kind of like it if everything is correct, right? Because it makes your API also beautiful. You can use Python typing in Python, and by extending from this API model, your API will use camel casing. So this is an example, and I can try it out probably. Yes, so this is an example. Automatically, it will map it to the right formatting. There's a lot more to be said about FastAPI, but I'm not gonna do that because I will run out of time. So let's see if we can continue. So this is an example of combining FastAPI with Django. So I still have my Django application running, and by adding FastAPI takes precedence, takes over some URL routes, and there you can implement your FastAPI application. And actually, you can use your Django ORM. And the good thing is as well, and I have an example on that, but I don't think I have time for it. You can do async queries as well. So within the Django ORM, you can use, if you define your methods as async, you can use the async ORM methods since Django, I think 4.1, and they perform, they do everything asynchronously. So that's, I think, really nice. Maybe I have time for this. No. So. Maybe I have time for some other examples, but I just wanted to make sure that I got my talk, my motivation right. So why would you do it? Why would you add FastAPI to Django? Because you already have Django. So what I like about it is you have a consistent API, so there's automatic documentation and validation. You don't have any undocumented attributes, and the code style is consistent. Adhering the naming conventions in Python and JSON. And I think writing pedantic models is like a concise, powerful way of expressing things in Python, and it gives you IDE support out of the box. So, and one step back, so why did what are the alternatives and why would you use FastAPI? When I started with, I'm still working on one of a monolith application, and when I started doing it in 2011, I think I used mainly TastyPie as a framework for creating REST APIs. TastyPie is not something I would advise today, but because I think it's deprecated. We had some work to make it work in Python 3, but it's there and it works. We currently mainly use Django REST framework, and it kind of makes sense because Django REST framework is really good. It's really integrated with Django. Has lots of good properties. So why use FastAPI with Django? For me, I think a few motivations pop in the back of my head. So. Let me think, like in 2011 when I said, we have this API, do you want to use it? Most of my clients told me, an API, what's that, right? So I think using APIs is more, we currently get requests the other way around. Like previously they would say, don't you have something with FTP or email with the CSV, right? And now they ask me like, where's your Swagger specification, right? It's like, okay, this is a different type of question. So the world has evolved a little bit. And also what I see is if you are creating an API and you're doing it, like what we mostly have been doing is creating an API, creating our domain model in Django, evolving the database, and also using this in our front end. And if you do it in the same team, it's very easy as everything is the same. So in Django REST Framework or TastyPie, what you basically do is you have a CRUD mapping of your database model to the front end, and it's very easy to manipulate your database through an API because everything is the same. And what I now see when the company has grown, we have separated teams with front end and back end, and we have external parties demanding specific APIs, also doing some reports. So there we get some different demands of what our API does. And also we want a little bit more stable. So if we change something in our database model, maybe we shouldn't change the API. We want some documentation. So I think writing everything in FastAPI, even though it's an additional step of creating a separate layer where you specify what your API looks like, it gives you the power of designing an API in a very, elegant way because of Pydantic. So I think this is why I like it. So these are one of the few of the motivations. Like your database model is not necessarily your user interface. It's something I have to tell sometimes to remind myself or my team of, right? So and also sometimes your database model is not your REST API. So and adding a abstraction layer in between is nice. And I would like to do it in a very concise and simple way, just like Django does it, and I think FastAPI does it. So, and what happens then is like you design your user interface, you can also design your REST API, and when I used TastyPie, mostly like adding documentation was an afterthought, and most of the documentation wasn't there, wasn't extensive enough to be used by other people. So like I mentioned this before, but I like Django because you can express stuff very simply, very concise, like the models or the admin or the forms, like I showed earlier. And I think FastAPI allows me to express what my API looks like in a similar fashion. So yeah, FastAPI and others. FastAPI is not the only thing you can use if you use Django, because I'm a little bit maybe no, I'm not a baby. I'm a little bit how do you say it? I like Django, to use Django a lot. So usually I evaluate other frameworks with respect to like, does it work with Django, right? So Django frameworks is still something I would use for many things. It's also very integrated with Django, so it kind of makes sense. Oh yeah, I added GitHub stars. Actually, it's a popular framework. It's good to see. I also noticed Lightstar and Django Ninja. Yeah, they look like FastAPI. This Django Ninja especially, but like if I read about it, it's like very much inspired by FastAPI. Maybe it's something to use in the future with Django over FastAPI. And the funny thing is, like, what I thought is, if Django would have been invented now, would it be smart to use this Pydantic language for defining your models, right? Because it's even a more concise, more expressive, more supported by the IDE, and more supported by your tools, way to express stuff, right? I would like to actually specify my database models in Pydantic, because I think it's a really cool way of expressing things in Python. And when I was reading a little bit more about FastAPI, I also noticed that the same author created a SQL model which actually does that. So it's something I would evaluate in the future, because it looks like a very cool concept. And there's a lot more things to talk about. And also for FastAPI, talking about FastAPI, it's like there's a lot of talk about performance. So I frankly, for most of my use cases, I don't care that much about performance. I mean, of course, it's somewhere in there, but there are plenty of options to optimize. But you can see that FastAPI is created for performance, so there's a good choice anyway. And there's also a very cool feature called the dependency injection, and it's a way of if you want to get data from your front end or in your functions. Dependency injection is a very expressive way of allowing you to get data from either user input or headers or URL parameters, or maybe even your context environments, and you express it in a way that you do with almost like PyTest fixtures. It's a little bit of magic, but once you get the hang of it, it's a very magic way of allowing you to get data in. And it's a very interesting topic to dive into, but I don't think I have time for it today. So this is what I wanted to say to you guys about how I use FastAPI with Django.
Well, thank you, Ivor, for your talk. Are there any questions from the audience? Yeah, you. So the question is, are there any more possibility against getting different...
That's what it looks like. It's only validating the type, but sometimes you also want to make sure that the content you get isn't too long or too short, or matches some regular expression or something like that.
Yeah, so the question is, like, I showed only Pydantic types with simple integers or simple strings, right? And most of the times you have more data validation. And the answer is yes, you can do that. Actually, you can write down, instead of writing an int or a string, you can say, I have a field. So it's an expression of either Pydantic or FastAPI, I think Pydantic. And it allows you to do all kinds of validation. But then your code looks a little bit more complex, but you can add complexity in many steps, and I think most of the normal use cases they have taken into consideration. So I think it's a very powerful way to express, to use pedantic and to use this type of validation. But it didn't show it in examples because, well, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, next question.
Could you elaborate a bit on this dependency injection? Give an example, because
Do you have an example of dependency injection in your, well, maybe in your code or like existing code on your computer?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I need too much time. I'm really willing to show it because it's really cool. But it's and I'm using some libraries that use dependency injections with data classes, and then in the post init they override stuff. But giving an example will take me a little bit more than time than I have. I'm sorry.
Well, in short, your functions are views, and you can put your dependencies there, and then when the view is being called, the dependency is being resolved, and then you can override it during tests, right? That's the summary of things.
Cool, thanks.
Yes.
Suppose your model has some fields which you don't want to expose in the API. How would you go about it in your example?
Oh, the models that are not exposed, the fields that are not exposed, or should not be exposed in the model.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. So if you have a model, a database model, and you don't want certain fields to be exposed, how do you do that, right? So the funny thing is, in Django REST framework, what you do is you say, I have a mapping, this is the model, and these are the fields I include, or these are the fields I exclude. They have nice ways of doing this. In FastAPI, it's a different way. What you actually do is you say, I will design what my API looks like. So you are kind of required to write, to repeat maybe the fields that you want. So leaving them out will not expose them, right? So this is a very simple way. So you design, I think this is how I use it at least. You design your API, you think like, what do I want my API to look like? And this is, you can express it very simply, and this mapping will be automatically, or there are many ways to manipulate how it gets mapped. But this is more the advanced part of FastAPI. Yeah.
We still have time for a few more questions. Are there any questions in the back, maybe? Yeah, you?
so you have worked with the URL routing, the database models, put that into FastAPI. Have you also touched on other subjects which are common in Django, like middlewares or anything like that?
So what's your experience in integrating FastAPI in terms of middleware and other kinds of Django principles?
It's a good question because for now I've only used it with WSGI middleware. So what I did is in my example I showed you the ASGI.py and how to create an ASGI application of Django. So then the question immediately becomes like, okay, is your middleware capable of handling this stuff? Django does a lot of magic stuff to allow you to switch from async to sync, also with middleware, but it's mostly the Django part. So if you're not capable of using the get ASGI application of Django with your current middleware application, you can use get WSGI whiskey. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but the get WSGI application from Django, and you can map it with FastAPI middleware, and it allows you to use to mount your Django application as WSGI middleware, and that's actually the only method I've been doing it so far. When creating this presentation, I thought, oh wow, you can even get a, because a lot of things have changed in Django. I think 4.1 for doing async ORM and also async views. So Django is also getting more capable of doing things. But it's a valid question, and I am not 100% sure if you won't run into any problems with that either. But I've been using it successfully in production, and I see the middleware runs, but it is based on the get WSGI application. So maybe you need to take into consideration some aspects if you want to use the ASGI application. But it also allows you to do more async stuff. So you also get nice goodies out of it. Yeah.
I think there's time for still one more question if someone has a... well, you, please. So the question is, why don't you serve them as two separate applications and you are importing the routes into one application?
Yeah, it's a good point. That's also it's a good question. It's funny because I'm kind of used of doing a lot of things in one application. But you could definitely also run more separate applications. Yeah. If you think like more micro, you would do things in different applications. But it's what I see is that every deployed application takes some work in your infrastructure and management, etc. But maybe if you already are deploying many applications and you do it very easily because now you're a Kubernetes expert or something else, right? Maybe it makes more sense to deploy it as a separate application. I do agree. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ivor, for your talk, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. We have a small gift for you.
Thank you.
And you guys, you have 15 minutes to get to the next room, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.